You're listening to American Edition on The Voice of Russia. I'm Rob Sachs. Talks continue to try to bring an end to the bloodshed in Syria that has left more than 100,000 people dead. So far, the United States and Russia are working on bringing all sides to the table at a so-called Geneva II convention. But right now, it's unclear who would attend those talks, as the Syrian National Council announced on Sunday they would not be participating. Here to help us sort out the next steps are Assaf Kfoury. He's a professor of computer science and mathematics at Boston University. Professor Kfoury regularly writes on issues pertaining to the Middle East. Also with us is Alexander Strakanov. He is director of the Institute of Russian History, Language, and Culture at Lyndon State College in Vermont. Welcome to both of you.
Glad to be with you.
So, Professor Kfoury, let's begin with you. Is there a legitimate Syrian opposition who could speak for those opposed to Bashar al-Assad at a convention?
You know, I'd like to point out something that's very interesting. Within the government now, there is a group represented by a man by the name of Qadri Jamil, who is the deputy prime minister. Now, he is not a passive. He belongs to something called, well, I'm translating from Arabic, the People Want Party. He's a former member of the Communist Party in Syria. And this is a person who says things that are very realistic, in my opinion. He says that there's no military solution to this conflict. Neither opposition groups nor the government are in a position to win outright military confrontation. And for the last few weeks, he's been calling for negotiation and bringing together people to the Geneva II conference. Now, this is a man within the government, and it's a man who belongs to a group that participated in the demonstration at the beginning of the uprising. So members of his group, of his party, in 2011 and 2012 were in the demonstration, and some of them were also killed in this demonstration with an opposition that was largely non-military. So if you ask, for example, who is this opposition and who has a legitimate presence in Syria, well, this is a person that considers himself within the opposition and at the same time speaking from within the government.
Well, I want to get Professor Strakanov to weigh in on this as well. Who really speaks for the opposition?
I agree with the statement that it is so fragmented that it is difficult to identify somebody who can speak on behalf of all of opposition of Syria. So I don't think that there is such force. What I think we should do, we should identify with whom we believe this conversation is possible, because there is Al-Qaeda organizations or affiliated with Al-Qaeda organizations. Should they be invited to Geneva too? This is an important and interesting question. So United States, the West in general, so-called Russia, have to decide whom do they want to see at that conference, and to follow with this decision just between them. Because at this point, as I see it, even United States and Russia can't come up with conclusion what's the formula of this conference.
Well, I wanted to ask Professor Kfoury, should that be a litmus test to see if you can come to this conference, whether or not you have any affiliations with Al-Qaeda?
Well, if you ask my own opinion, I don't know what Mr. Kelly, John Kerry, thinks about this. Look, is largely at this point being armed and supported by external forces that are not within Syria. So if you say, in my opinion, they should not be included in a conference. I mean, their interest, as a matter of fact, I would speculate at this point, is not to have this conference happen at all.
Professor Strakanov, you brought up another interesting idea, which is what are the conditions for these talks to happen? And right now you have Secretary of State Kerry still talking about a Syria without...
Assad should be there.
Right, exactly. I mean, should Assad, be there? And because he's saying we shouldn't have a Syria with Assad. So can that be a precondition to talks?
Of course not. Absolutely not. Because what is the argument that Bashar Assad government must participate in this conference? That this government still exists. And this government has support of significant, we're not going to go into discussion what's the percentage, nobody knows this percentage now, but the fact that government stays that government army continues to fight on the ground, and government has support of significant number of Syrian people from different ethnic religious groups. Already this fact should be stated as absolutely necessity for government to participate in the conference.
And Professor Kfoury, it seems as though...
I agree with this. I mean, there's no... Look, I mean, I think Assad represents a significant element within Syrian society. I'm not going to say he represents everybody. I do not personally say, I don't classify according to sectarian or religious identity who he represents. I mean, after all, many people who belong to the Sunni community support him, but also many people in the Alawite community does not support him. So there's a political problem there, but he represents a sizable component of that society, and he should be there without precondition. Just as on both sides, I would say, they should be available to enter negotiation without preconditioning anything.
And looking at the recent talks surrounding the chemical weapons Syria has and Syria giving them up, did that not lend legitimacy to Assad, because you're saying you are a legitimate government who can legitimately enter into talks and give up your chemical weapons? So is it kind of two-sided to say, on the one hand, you can't participate in talks about Syria's future, but on the other hand, you are legitimate enough to negotiate giving up your chemical weapons?
From the point of view of the U.S. government, yes. I mean, the fact that Assad is giving up the chemical weapons is a positive sign, and for the U.S. government, this is a sign that he's serious about entering some kind of negotiation. Let me point out something from an Arab point of view, or from the Syrian point of view. Now, these chemical weapons were there for a reason. I mean, okay, the problem is that he has used, or it's presumed that the government has used these chemical weapons against its own people. I'm not going to discuss whether or not he has done that, but these chemical weapons were there for many years because the Syrian government was not in a position to develop its own deterrent against Israel. And they started having these chemical weapons precisely as a deterrent, the way they saw it, the deterrent to the nuclear option that Israel had. Now, what has happened recently is that Assad has been forced, the Assad government has been forced to give up the chemical weapon, and for later, there's a problem that is going to come up later for whoever is going to be there as a government, is that Syria as a state will no longer have anything to deter the state of Israel from confronting it. I mean, after all, Israel as a state is occupying a part of Syria, the Golan Heights. So there's something here that is the Syrian state, the government of Syria, is being deprived of these chemical weapons, but at the same time it's innovative.
Well, Professor Strakanov, want to get your take on that and where Israel plays into this.
That's an interesting twist that I actually never heard before, and I need to think about that. However, I think Assad in this situation acting as quite pragmatic and realistic politician, because with all issues associated with Israel and threat that Israel may represent in his eyes to Syria, the most pressing issue for him right now, it's not Israel, it's an opposition. In these circumstances, which were developed since late August, I think the decision that Assad government made to get rid of chemical weapons was absolutely justified, rational and pragmatic decision. From standpoint of United States, yes, it's again a sort of double position, because we hear that actually it can be done without him, which I very seriously doubt. And that position, which was presented now by my colleague from Boston University, it is very interesting because it works exactly in opposition to opinion of American government that everybody in Syria will agree to give up weapons of mass destruction. It might not be true, and it is really important to see that both sides, opposition as well as government, will cooperate with this destruction. Because I have a great suspicion that opposition may use this argument in attempts to keep chemical weapons, Those, again, were saying that they don't have it, but I seriously doubt that they don't have it. And this argument that we needed to deter Israel, that's an interesting thing.
With deterring Israel, you could see that they are not going out and trying to annex any more territory right now.
Right. I completely agree that Israel is no threat to Syria at this point, as Syrians are a threat to themselves, because they are in the middle of the civil war. Nobody hurting Syria and Syrian people more than Syrian people themselves, plus those mercenaries that came from some other countries and were invited by some radical groups. So Israel, I think, should be left alone in this conversation. But it's interesting how this argument may come up eventually.
Professor Kfoury, is there any hope? I mean, it seems as though this whole thing about even getting the chemical weapons kind of happened almost on a whim, a seemingly offhanded remark by Secretary Kerry. Could there be any other openings that could provide some way to de-escalate the violence?
Before I answer that, let me just make a qualification. I agree that at this point, the major killing that is taking place in Syria is internal. It's like Syrian killing Syrian. But it's also, I'd like just to point out the following, that people on both sides of the conflict in Syria, on both the opposition and the government, and in the opposition, I'm not putting people who are affiliated with Al-Qaeda. I'm including people who are like a man by the name of Michel Kilo. He's in the opposition, but he's in Damascus. Okay, so he's the kind of person that has been in jail, in and out. He's not a Ba'athist, but he considers himself, and he is in the opposition. Now, what I would like to point out is that these people, not totally of the same point of view in relation to the issue of chemical weapons. They say, yes, we should give up the chemical weapons, but we would like to be part of a comprehensive regional policy, which means what? Like other states in the region should give up also weapon of mass destruction at the same time. Well, okay. That's why, I brought up the issue of Israel, because Israel, there's no question about it. Israel has weapon of mass destruction, including nuclear option, at a far more sophisticated level than any of the other states around it. Okay, so it is true, I agree with that. It is true that right now, the killing that is happening in Syria is Syrian killing Syrian. That is true, there's a civil war. But these people are still engaged in discussing what after, what is going to come after. They are talking about, all right, a year from now, 2 years from now, whether it's Assad in or out, where are we going to be? Are we going to be at the mercy of a neighbor like Israel that is all-powerful, and we have nothing to deter them from, after all, about 2-3 years ago, they could have demolished one of the nuclear power plants that was in northern Syria. Anyway, but in answer to your question, what could be done at this point? The hope we have, I think we should have a collective hope here, is that Geneva 2 is going to take place. And the hope we should have is that, yes, the Assad regime cannot be excluded from that conversation, this negotiation.
We just have a minute left. I wanted to get Professor Strakanov to weigh in as well. Do you share that hope that this Geneva 2 conference will take place?
In an ideal world, what I would like to happen, that such conference happens without any preconditions. I completely rule out that it should exclude the Assad or anything of this sort. I hope that this conference should be open to any force in Syria that really wants to negotiate. And if this happens, and this type of people get together in Geneva, Russia, Western countries, United States should concentrate their attention exactly on those people who want to have peace. Stop supporting, stop arming all these rebels, all these mercenaries that are coming from other countries, and stay to those countries that support those mercenaries and radicals. Stop doing it. Because if we really want to bring peace in Syria, there is no alternative to political solution. But political solution can be accomplished only to those who are willing to make this political solution possible. So what I think should be done, that they should encourage participants of this conference to reach political solution, at least to give a chance for peace. It may work, it may not. Some civil wars, as we know, lasting for decades. It will be very unfortunate for Syria if it is going to be its fate.
That's Alexander Strakanov. He is the director of the Institute of Russian History, Language, and Culture at Lyndon State College in Vermont. We're also joined by Assaf Kfoury. He is a professor of computer science and mathematics at Boston University. He also regularly writes on the Middle East. Professor Strakanov and Professor Kfoury, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.